This, to me, is how you connect with a reviewer, not by selling skills, but by showing. Mission accepted. Season 2 is finally here. Episode 1. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am okay. I'm battling a cold, so I don't sound normal. So I apologize for that. But hopefully, having a good episode with you, kicking off season 2, will make up for me not sounding normal. So I first want to say congratulations for getting into medical school. This is going to be fun because Mission Accepted, as opposed to application renovation, is a celebration. We get to celebrate you getting into medical school. We get to look at your application. Thank you for being vulnerable, for coming on, letting other people learn from your mistakes and your successes that allowed you to get into medical school. First, I want to hear your self-reflection. Why do you think you were successful this application cycle?
Well, thank you first and foremost for having me here. It's really cool to be here. I started watching your shows and podcasts when I first started this journey. I feel like I was successful because I was able to convey my story, as you always say. And I feel like throughout my entire experiences going through the pre-med journey, I've always sought to intentionally sit there and reflect on the why of each part. And I think I was able to share that in my personal statement and in the interviews that I've had so far. I feel like I was able to convey exactly why it is I wanted to be a physician, despite some of the struggles that I faced throughout the process, especially with my MCAT. But I feel like overall, because I was able to convey the why of why I feel like I deserve to be a physician, I think that's why I was able to be successful.
Nice. And so one application cycle, one interview, and one acceptance. Is that the power of one that we're going with here?
Yes. So right now, yeah, I actually just had an interview a couple weeks ago with Incarnate Word School of Osteopathic Medicine as
Great.
well. I was placed on their wait list, but I declined the offer to be on the wait list because I felt very strongly with the current acceptance I have.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. So multiple interviews and we still have that acceptance. So that's great. So
Right.
I want to jump into your application. That's what everyone loves to see is the application. And so a fun thing that we get to see here is an ACOMAS application, which is the DO application. So as we look at your application, we'll scroll through and students can see that the DO application is different in terms of printing out a PDF, right? And that's really the biggest thing I want everyone to make sure they understand is that in application renovation, in mission accepted, what we are looking at are PDF printouts from the application service. This is not what medical schools see. So just a clarification there. And so as we go through your application, no red flags, which is great. Obviously, that red flags hurt an application. And we get to the standardized tests, and we see your Mcat score. You did mention your Mcat score. You took it once, it looks like, with a 499, right? Not a great overall score, with Chem Phys really being your biggest downfall from crossing that 500 threshold. A lot of students fear that getting a low score in a hard science like Chem Phys is like the death knell for getting into medical school. When you got back that 122, were you surprised or were you struggling with Chem Phys throughout your studying?
So I was not surprised. It's where I hurt the most, but I was surprised about how low it was. So I guess going into my exam, there were just a lot of emotions happening that day. Like there's been a lot of deaths in my family this year from COVID and cancer, and that was definitely playing a role into it because I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to do really well in this section. When I first opened the MCAT, like I didn't realize they were going to let me start early if I got there early to the testing center. I showed up like an hour early thinking, okay, I have an hour to get back in my headspace. And they're like, okay, you can go in the exam room. And I was just like, oh goodness, it's starting. And I opened the test and then all I see is physics. And I said, oh my God, physics is probably the part that really drove my score down in that section the most. I took physics in the summer of 2020 online, and I took it in 2 sets of 4-week courses. So I definitely feel like the physics knowledge that I had was probably not the best. And when I was practicing and studying for the MCAT, I noticed that it was being low yield. So I was trying to focus on high yield subjects in physics. And the kind of stuff that I got was just not something that I really paid a lot of attention to. And so I knew at that point, okay, this is not going to be my friend this time. I also did not have organic chemistry 2 prior to taking the MCAT. I'm currently in organic chemistry 2 right now. And so I feel like some of the organic chemistry 1 topics that I kind of had forgotten some of those things and might have relied a little bit too much on previous knowledge of it. When I was taking the practice exams, there were things that I was still familiar with. But when I got to the MCAT, I did have a couple synthesis questions that for me, I was just like, I don't know what the answer to this is. And so I definitely feel like if I had time to take Orgo 2, I probably could have done a lot better, because at this point, while being in Orgo 2, I'm very knowledgeable on everything related to functional groups, on everything related to this type of synthesis problem, and experimental techniques too. Finally being in the lab in person, I actually have a working knowledge of the things that I had to study for. So I think online stuff definitely brought me down a bit.
Interesting. Okay. And just a clarification, as we're recording this, we are in the 2021-2022 application cycle. And this is the application cycle that you have an acceptance for. Typically, we're talking to students who were kind of the year prior, but because you have an early acceptance, we got you in for this recording, which is great.
Right.
So you put your SAT on here. Not every student does. Why did you choose to put your SAT score on here?
So I actually had to. I applied to Lake Erie College of LECOM. I applied to theirs in the Bradenton, Florida location.
Yep.
And they required that. So I had to figure out what my SAT was again.
So LECOM does an MCAT substitution, basically score. They have some sort of algorithm, some sort of calculation that uses your SAT score. So if you apply to them, you put in your SAT score, which is great. All right, so as we go down your application, the next thing we get to are your grades. And so freshman year, we can see starting off, we got lots of A's, which is great. Lots of A's continue, a random B, a couple more B's, which are great. So your grades, just glancing at them as we kind of scroll through them, look wonderful. And then we get to this funny GPA table that the ACOMAS application prints out. And we can see that your baccalaureate, which is your undergraduate degree, is a 3.8. Your science GPA, 3.61. So great stats GPA-wise, and potentially gave the medical schools a little bit of extra confidence that you are able to handle the coursework of medical school, but for some reason the MCAT just tripped you up. 4.0 non-science GPA also looks wonderful. As we continue down, you can just see the way that ACOMAS prints out everything. We got all these extra certificates and of training certificates that you put in your application. I'll just scroll through those. And then we get to your activity lists. And remember, ACOMAS doesn't limit how many activities that you can put on, which is wonderful. And we get to the first one here that we have, and it's a shadowing experience. And I'm interested, you put a podiatric medicine here, podiatric physician shadowing on your application. Did you have any conversations with people about, should I put podiatric medicine, should I not, on my medical school application? What was the thought process there?
Well, I think for me, that's where the journey starts.
Yep.
Because my process of thinking about medical school seriously began when I broke my foot playing basketball.
Yep.
It had always been something in the back of my head. And I ended up shadowing with, one of the podiatrists. And I felt like it was important because it showed, in my opinion, that I had considered other things other than being a physician before, specifically like a medical physician, not just for podiatry. And I decided to keep it there because I felt like it said, I have thoroughly considered other professions, but I am still choosing the path of becoming a physician.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So that works. And we'll see later on in your personal statement that definitely is your path to medicine through that ankle injury. So we have other other activities here. This health chair, volunteer, going kind of through what your role is. Nothing really standing out in terms of good or bad. It's just a good description of kind of your role in that situation. We get to more volunteer, this runner teammate intramurals. And again, just kind of what you did, kind of just a basic statement. What normally stands out for me are the bad ones, and I always get criticism of like, Dr. A, you always show the bad examples, like show us good examples. And I'm just like, I'm just not wired that way, and most of the examples I get are bad. But yours are not bad, not amazing, at least the couple that we've looked at so far. They do what they need to do. They show me what you did. They show me who you are in a little bit of a way. In what I mean by that, in terms of who you are, is you have here, I love being able to listen to my music and perform meditative runs through the Nike Run Club app. I've run well over 500 miles while being a college student, pushed my limits by running a half marathon last year. So it tells me who you are. One of the things that I love that you didn't do is you didn't try to sell yourself. And that's where students go wrong, is they'll take this example and they'll say, well, my dedication to running has allowed me to transform that dedication into my career and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, like don't do that. Just tell me about running and what you love about it, and et cetera. So a great job with not going overboard and trying to sell anything there. Just show me who you are. This next one here, I have crisis counselor. You're a volunteer. And I wrote a note here that you tried some storytelling here. You tried to say, hey, one shift, a person texted into our line with a plan and means to end her life that night. And so you tried to get into a little bit of a story. It could have been much stronger by making it a little bit more just better storytelling, giving this person a name, allowing me to connect with that person as well. And really helping me connect with how you impacted this person's life. But you were able to tell this little bit of a story, which helps me understand who you are and the impact that you had on this situation. So great job. And again, you didn't try to sell yourself. You mentioned that you've listened to my stuff, you've been watching videos, etc. Did you purposefully have to like try to stay away from selling yourself as you were going through this process, with like Dr. Gray's voice in your head going, don't do that?
You were definitely there in moments where I would look again, think again at something I had just written. I was like, okay, what is this saying? Is this describing my reflection, or is this trying me to sell myself? But I have to note too, about the crisis counseling. This giving stories is a little bit difficult because we do have privacy guidelines we have to follow. So I could not share the name or too many specifics, but I still felt like I have to give an idea of what I was doing with this. And I do feel like this experience and that specific person texting it, that was something that was very critical to my process of reflection about why I want to be a physician. So I felt like I had to include something related to it, but I also wanted to respect our privacy guidelines.
1,000%. You need to always respect privacy. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. And when I say give a name, I don't mean the person's name. I mean, just put a name down, a pseudonym. So like Jane called that night. And just the fact that it's a pseudonym, you put it in quotes the first time you use it, just to let everyone know, be like, I understand that that HIPAA is a thing and I shouldn't be violating anyone's privacy. So just so you know, I know, whatever, right? And so you put it in quotes the first time you use it. And just that mere fact that now I know this person's name is Jane, right? And I know it's a fake name, but it's just a name. Human psychology says I connect better with that. And so that's what I mean by put a name. All right, so good job with that. Got some storytelling. This next one, healthcare experience, care manager. Again, another story here, right? And you did a name this time. So it's weird you did a pseudonym this time because you put it in quotes. You said Miss Franny, and talking about a McDonald's burger flashed on the screen, right? A good little story here. Perfect job. Again, you didn't try to sell. You didn't try to go overboard. You were just talking about the interaction with this person and what it meant for you. which is perfect. This, to me, is how you connect with a reviewer, not by selling skills, but by showing stories, writing stories that help that reviewer see who you are. All right, so we keep going. And then just a lot of other basic experiences that just kind of round out who you are, what you've been through. Another volunteer healthcare experience with a story of the 1970s People magazine book was a hit amongst our patients, right? Just right away, I can kind of picture that. I can see it. Another story here with Miss Fatima, and just, again, another story helping the reviewer see who you are, which is perfect. So you have lots of great experiences, healthcare, non-healthcare, a little bit of everything. You have this non-healthcare employment as a volunteer coordinator, and you use numbers here, which I always recommend for ones where maybe you don't have a story, and numbers work better to show impact. You said here, I was able to recruit over 50 volunteers for our efforts. So I can see you in this situation helping recruit over 50 volunteers, and I can go, well, that's some leadership there. That's obviously some communication skills. That's some organizational skills. Without you selling me those things, I can understand that just through your words, which is the goal that I'm constantly trying to get across to students. Again, non-healthcare employment, this compensation as a resident assistant, virtual learning mentor, another great story here, dealing with residents, working with residents. Patriot leader, another story, right? So story. During your interviews or anywhere else along this process, did anyone comment on your writing and how you connected with them through how you wrote your activities?
Yes, actually. So Dr. Randall Longenecker, who is part of Ohio University Heritage College of Medicine's rural underserved program, he was the former director of it, and he told me in our interview that he connected so much with the way I wrote and the way that I described my experiences. It just seemed very intentional and reflective about my.
Yeah.
He definitely did.
Wonderful. And that key word, that last word, reflective, right? That's what I want all of you to do, is reflect on these experiences and let the reader understand not just what you did, and not from a duty perspective, but just impact-wise, but also what it meant to you. All right. So that's great. All right. So we continue down. And we have another non-healthcare volunteer, community enrichment here, where he said, one of my favorite projects was creating Maintain Mason. Right? Again, reflection. Good follow-up to that last point. And I highlighted it. I wrote great here because you were able to reflect on that situation, help the reader understand what was important to you about this experience. And it's perfect for an open interview, for an interviewer to go, oh, tell me more about this Maintain Mason. Why was this so important to you? Right? And then you can have a great conversation about it. And it will allow your passions to come out because you are basically directing them to the things that you want to talk about. Right? And it's not a sales pitch. It's not like, oh, I'm so skilled and talented and hardworking. It's just this, this is one of my favorite things that I did. So great job with that. We get down to awards and just some basic awards. Pretty easy to write about, nothing special there. So great job with all those. And then we get down into your personal statement. And your personal statement, I was actually less blown away with. Activity descriptions were great. And it was very interesting to hear why you put the podiatric medicine shadowing experience in your application as this kind of intentional way of going, I've explored other things. Because I wrote a note here in your personal statement that you have a whole paragraph here also doing the same thing, but for NP, not podiatric medicine. You have this whole paragraph about why you're not interested in being an NP. And for me, that's a distraction. I understand students want to do it because they're afraid of this question. Well, why not this and why not that? And honestly, I don't think it's necessary to talk about in a personal statement. I think interviewers that bring it up are weak interviewers unless there are very specific reasons for why you are not considering something. I think you should be aware of it if your parent is a PA, your parent's an NP or a nurse. Well, why not follow in your parents' footsteps, right? I think it's a very easy question to ask. It wouldn't be asked normally from someone with no family healthcare exposure, and you're saying, hey, I want to go to medical school. I think it's a very weak question to ask. Well, why not this? Because ultimately, a lot of the healthcare fields are very, 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 very similar, right? To me, podiatric medicine is about as equal to MDDO as you can get, right? It's 4 years of medical school. You need to take the MCAT to get in. You do a residency after, typically, I'm pretty sure. And then you are a surgeon, right? For the most part, most podiatric physicians act as surgeons, just in a very specific part of the body, right? It's as close to being a physician, a medical physician that we normally would call an MD or DO, as you can get, right? Depending on the state, you're working ankle down, mid shin down, knee down, right? It's just depending on the state and the laws for the podiatric physicians in that state. It really depends. So it's hard to have an argument to go, well, I don't want to be a podiatrist because I want to be a hand surgeon, right? I mean, like you can get super nitty gritty, like, well, the foot is just the hand of the lower limb, right? Yeah. We could go round and round and round, and so I didn't think you needed to put it in your personal statement. I understand why you put it in your experience descriptions, especially on a COMIS, because there's unlimited spots. You can easily put it in there. So for me, it's a distraction. You have a little bit of a timeline in your personal statement of like, I went from this, I went to this, I went to this, and then this happened and this. So a little bit timeliney, but ultimately you did what you needed to do, which if you go to application renovation videos, students don't do what they need to do. I see where you came from, talking about the fireworks and kind of PTSD and dealing with veterans coming back and not getting the care they need and having that exposure and being interested, having this injury and kind of getting exposed to podiatrists and physical therapy and all this other stuff and kind of being exposed. So ultimately, at the end of the day, I can see why you're on this journey. I think, again, some distractions here and there, but ultimately you did, at the end of the day, did what you needed to do, which is help me understand why you want to be a physician. Where did you come from? Where are you going? Right? Cotton Eye Joe.
Sure.
I don't know.
If I can,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I can, I feel like I want to express a little bit more about why I chose to include the nurse practitioner discussion.
Yeah.
So I'm of Filipino heritage.
Yep.
It is extremely, extremely common for Filipino Americans to become nurses.
Yep.
And I've been asked many times, why don't you just become a nurse practitioner? Why don't you just go down the nursing route? By my family, because we have nurses in my family. And it's been the same question over, why not just do nursing? So I think this is kind of where, I had a knowledge about why I was including that, but I can see from your perspective how that could be distracting in that sense of like, it just kind of feels like it's out of nowhere, but it's a smaller part of what brought me into the medical route with this stuff. And especially because my nurse practitioner was Filipina too, where she and I had these conversations about, why not just do nurse practitioning? So it's been a question I've been asked a lot down my journey.
Yeah. And it's interesting because some of the points you made at the bottom of this paragraph is they do not have full autonomy or as much authority to independently practice. That's changing every day. The NP lobby is pushing. And I would say NPs, and I don't have any data to support this, but just anecdotally from what I see day in and day out, is NPs actually have more autonomy than PAs to go out and open a practice and practice independently, obviously depending on the state that they're in. So I would say that, well, you could be an NP and practice independently with full autonomy, just depending on the state. So again, it gets into this distraction and ultimately brings up conversations that just aren't needed for this part of the process. But I can understand, based on heritage and culture around yourself, that there's this conversation. We see it a lot with when I was in New York for medical school and Boston for my internship. Very similar kind of cultural identities around nurses, whether they're Jamaican or Dominican. It's like those were the nurses, and so those people as well. Students coming up from that kind of culture and kind of background are potentially dealing with the same pressures from the family. Like, well, why do you want to be a nurse, or why do you want to be a physician?
Right.
Our whole family are nurses. Why is that not good enough for you? And so you're dealing with that internal family conflict, and then you just like spit it out in your personal statement because it's just such a big part of your conversations anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so just a general kind of normal, I think, tone and message that students try to get across these days is feeling limited, right? Not doing enough, feeling limited. I think it's getting overused now because it's just cliche to say that thing without supporting it and actually showing what that means. And you have here, while my experiences and the range of topics I've discussed with the people are highly rewarding and variant, I still feel limited. So I would tell everyone watching this, listening to this, is try to vary words as much as possible and try not to just go, well, I wanted to do more and I couldn't. Obviously, being a physician or having any sort of higher education, whether that's PA, NP, podiatry, whatever it is, leads to having more education and more credentials to do those things that potentially you're interested in doing. Not the best personal statement, but it did the job necessary. And I would say that the far majority of personal statements do that. They do just that, right? We have this bell curve of personal statements where the bottom of the curve are all the ones on application renovation where it's like, I am the most dedicated person in the world. I'm like, no, like don't do that. And then the top of the bell curve are just the phenomenal, just like pristine personal statements that I'm just like, oh my gosh, I really want to talk to you. You are amazing. And then this one falls just in line with the majority of personal statements that aren't overwhelming, that aren't underwhelming, that I'm just whelmed. That's not a word. I'm just whelmed. It does the job, and that's all it needs to do. And so we get to the end of that, and I'm like, okay, you have great experiences. You have a good story. I understand your journey to medical school. You potentially fit our mission here at the school, whatever it is. You have good grades, your MCAT score, but it's a lot dragged down by one subsection. And I would say, let's go ahead and interview this person and see where you're at. Your COVID-19 question. So ACOMAS added the COVID-19 question to their primary application. So it's here as well, right? So being forced home, living in the closet, in terms of sexuality that you have here as well. So it opens up some more about kind of who you are. You're connecting with the reader, letting them know a little bit more of your background, and really just showing the reader what's going on, right? Dealing with deaths and mom's health and everything else, you get to this point of really just letting the reader understand context about this past year. And so if there was a dip in grades, if there was a dip in your MCAT score, then as the reviewer, it gives me context. And that's what I want everyone to understand, is that these essays are all about context, helping the reader understand everything you've been through. It doesn't need to be a story. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. It just needs to tell the truth about what you've been through. It's not a sob story. It's not anything else. A lot of people are scared when they write these essays of like, oh, I don't want to feel pity, right? Especially for a disadvantaged essay, which we'll see either next episode of Mission Accepted or the one after. A lot of people are worried about having someone feel pity for them, and I'm like, no, like you have to try really hard for that to happen. You just need to tell the truth, give me facts, and let me understand context about who you are, where you're from. What are your thoughts on everything we just talked about?
Hey, I feel like it's pretty accurate description. Like I definitely agree about my personal statement. I think it, like you said, did the job. That's what one of my physician mentors said too. They were just like, I don't think this one is going to get you any more interviews, but I think, at the same time, it does what it needs to do. I think I think context for me is one of my biggest strengths. I had to take one of those like Wall Street Journal strengths tests before, and the top one I have is context. So I think that was helpful for me in the process of writing some of these things.
Nice. Talk about the interview process. So you get through this process, you get that first interview invite. What was the interview like for you?
The interview was really great. So a little bit of context. While we're talking about the interview, one of the reasons I was guaranteed a medical school interview just by applying, actually. So I participated in Ohio University's summer undergraduate research fellowship program. And essentially what that is, and but last summer it was a virtual experience, and I was paired with someone who I matched with on their list of available researchers, and I had to apply to that separately. I did that in February and was accepted, actually, the morning I was planning to take my MCAT on March 26th. About 3 hours before the MCAT, I get an email saying I was accepted to the fellowship program. Now, being part of that fellowship program guarantees you a medical school interview. So I knew all along I was going to have a medical school interview going into the MCAT as well.
Nice.
And that was a big relief on me. It took the stress down a little bit. But anyways, so I had my summer research mentor, and then in July, they paired me with two different professors. Now, one of the professors that they paired me with, Dr. Ojano Sheehan, is also of Filipina heritage. And so it was really great to be able to connect with her and ask her, culturally sensitive questions about the area and everything. And I felt really reassured about where I was going to be within the Athens County area. And it was a great interview to be able to connect with her and, share both of our experiences. It was great. And then the second one I had was with Dr. Randall Longenecker, I believe he's retiring this year from Ohio, but he's been a family physician for a long time in rural, underserved areas. And again, we just had a really strong connection with each other about the types of things we care about. They were just good conversations. That's how I would look at those interviews. It felt like a conversation, and it felt like there was genuine interest on both sides of understanding.
Yeah, and it's something I talk about all the time, is that interview, treat it like a coffee shop conversation, right? You're just getting to know the person. They're not there to interrogate you or demean you or pick apart everything you've been doing. They just want to get to know you. And I would say it's probably not a coincidence that one of your interviewers is from kind of the same cultural background as you, because schools understand that they're trying to kind of put their best foot forward as well, to say, hey, I know potentially this is Ohio, and maybe you've heard some things about Ohio, about being white or whatever, but look, we have some Filipinos too, and come and look, we're going to have one interview you. And I think that's wonderful. It eases some fears for people going to different areas of the country that maybe they're not familiar with. And it's very, very common for schools to try to match interviewers based on either ethnic, language, whatever, culture, or experiences, to say, oh, like I studied this one random kind of bacteria in my research, and then my interviewer just randomly also studied that thing. I'm like, no, that's not randomly. Like that was right. Very, very specific. So I'm glad the interview went well. Very much a conversation. What was it like to get that acceptance at the end of the day?
It felt really great. It was the same, pretty much like the same day, actually. Really, really, really close. They called me at like 5:00 in the afternoon. It was the Dean Schreiner, and he's just like, "Hey, Sean, I got some good news for you. You're accepted to our program."
That's
and
awesome.
It was pretty great.
That's awesome.
I definitely felt like when I got the acceptance to the research fellowship, I kind of felt like I don't know. It's just that gut feeling inside of something good is coming here.
Yeah.
And there it is.
There it is. And you got it. So thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story with the world through Mission Accepted. Again, kicking off season 2 with a bang. I hope everyone can learn something, that the application, everyone thinks that the application needs to be this kind of over-the-top, shining star example of perfection. And yours was really good. And there were parts that were like, it was okay. It did the job. And that's all it needed to do. At the end of the day, you showed who you were. People wanted to talk to you. Besides that kind of mandatory interview that you were given, another school also interviewed you. And so there were great things in your application that showed that you've done a lot of research into who you are, what you want to do, and you put that in your application, which is perfect. So good job.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gray, and thank you for all the resources that you've provided for students along the journey. I don't really without having been connected to some of your podcasts and books and everything, especially in the Facebook group chat too, of how supportive a community is there. I think that's what's helped me get this far.